Chapter 1. Talk of heat, or better not, on Zekko. This waterlogged world combined all the most unattractive features of a steam bath, and one could only dream of coolness, greenness, more land than a stingy string of islands. The young man on the promontory above the crash of the waves wore the winged cap of a spaceman with the insignia of a cargo master, and not much else, save a pair of very short shorts. He wiped one hand absently across his bare chest and brought it away damp as he studied, through protective sun goggles, the treacherous promise of the bright sea. One could swim, if he wanted to lose most of his skin. There were minute organisms in that liquid that smacked their lips, if they had lips, every time they thought of a Terran. Dane Thorson licked his own lips, tasting salt, and plodded back through the sand of the spaceport to the berth of the Solar Queen. This had been a long day, and one with more snarl-ups than he cared to count, keeping him on a constant, dogged trot between the ship and the fitting yard, where riggers labored with the slowest motions possible to the human body, or so it seemed to the exasperated acting cargo master of the Free Trader. Captain Jellicoe had long ago taken refuge in his cabin to preserve the remnants of his temper. Dane had been allowed no such escape. The Queen had a schedule for refitting to serve as a mail ship, and that time allowance did not allow for humidity playing the devil with the innards of robot fitters. She had to be ready to lift when the Combine ship, now plying that run, set down and formally signed off in her favor. Luckily, most of the work was done, and Dane had given a last searching inspection before signing the rigger's book and reporting to his captain. The air-conditioned interior of the Queen comforted him as he climbed to his quarters. Ship air was flat, chemically pure but unappetizing stuff. Today it was a relief to breathe. Dane went to the bather. At least there was no lack of water, with the local skinners filtered out. It was chill but relaxing on his gaunt young body. He was sealing on his lightest tunic when the ramp buzzer sounded. A visitor. Oh, not the supervisor rigger again. Dane went to answer with dragging feet. For the crew of the Queen at the moment numbered exactly 4, with himself for general errand boy. Captain Jellicoe was in his quarters 2 levels above. Medic Tau was presumably overhauling his supplies, and Sinbad, ship's cat, asleep in some empty cabin. Dane jerked his tunic into place, very much on his guard as he came to the head of the ramp. But it was not the supervisor rigger. Dane, thoroughly used to unusual-appearing strangers, both human and alien, was impressed by this visitor. He was tall, this quiet man, his great height accented by a fit leanness, a narrowness of waist and hip, a length of leg and arm. His main article of clothing was the universal shorts of the Zekko settler, but being fashioned of saffron yellow, they were the more brilliant because of his darkness of skin. For he was not the warm brown of the Terran Negroes Dane had served beside, though he shared their general features. His flesh was really black, black with an almost bluish sheen. Instead of shirt or tunic, his deep chest was crossed by 2 wide straps, the big medallion marking their intersection giving forth flashes of gemfire when he breathed. He wore at his belt not the standard stun gun of a spaceman, but a weapon which resembled the more deadly patrol blaster, as well as a long knife housed in a jeweled and fringed sheath. To the eye, he was an example of barbaric force tamed and trimmed to civilized efficiency. He saluted, palm out, and spoke Galactic Basic with only a suggestion of accent. "I am Court Asaki. I believe Captain Jellicoe expects me?" "Yes, sir." Dane snapped to attention. So this was the Chief Ranger from the fabulous Khatka, Zekko's sister planet. The other ascended the cat ladder easily, missing no detail of the ship's interior as he passed. His expression was still one of polite interest as his guide rapped on the panel door of Jellicoe's cabin. And a horrible screech from Queeks, the captain's pet Hoobat, drowned out any immediate answer. Then followed that automatic thump on the floor of the blue-feathered crab-parrot-toad's cage, announcing that its master was in residence. Since the captain's cordial welcome extended only to his guest, Dane regretfully descended to the mess cabin to make unskilled preparations for supper, though there was not much you could do to foul up concentrates in an automatic cooker. "Company?" Tao sat beyond the cooking unit, nursing a mug of Terran coffee. "And do you have to serve music with the meals, especially that particular selection?" Dane flushed, stopped whistling in mid-note. Terrabound was old and pretty well worn out. He didn't know why he always unconsciously sounded off with that. "A chief ranger from Khatka just came on board," he reported, carefully offhand, as he busied himself reading labels. He knew better than to serve fish or any of its derivatives in disguise again. "Khatka?" Tao sat up straighter. "Now there's a planet worth visiting." "Not on a free trader's pay," commented Dane. "You can always hope to make a big strike, boy. But what I wouldn't give to lift ship for there." "Why, you're no hunter. How come you want to heat jets for that port?" "Oh, I don't care about the game preserves, though they're worth seeing, too. It's the people themselves." "But they're Terran settlers, or at least from Terran stock, aren't they?" "Sure." Tao sipped his coffee slowly. "But there are settlers and settlers, son, and a lot depends upon when they left Terra and why, and who they were. Also what happened to them after they landed out here." "And Khatkans are really special?" "Well, they have an amazing history. The colony was founded by escaped prisoners, and just one racial stock. They took off from Earth close to the end of the Second Atomic War. That was a race war, remember? Which made it doubly ugly." Tao's mouth twisted in disgust. "As if the color of a man's skin makes any difference in what lies under it. One side in that lineup tried to take over Africa, herded most of the natives into a giant concentration camp, and practiced genocide on a grand scale. Then they were cracked themselves, hard and heavy. During the confusion, some survivors in the camp staged a revolt, helped by the enemy. They captured an experimental station hidden in the center of the camp, and made a break into space in 2 ships which had been built there. That voyage must have been a nightmare, but they were desperate. Somehow they made it out here to the rim and set down on Khatka without power enough to take off again. And by then most of them were dead. But we humans, no matter what our race, are a tough breed. The refugees discovered that climactically their new world was not too different from Africa, a lucky chance which might happen only once in 1,000 times. So they thrived, the handful who survived, but the white technicians they had kidnapped to run the ships didn't. For they had set up a color bar in reverse. The lighter your skin, the lower you were in the social scale. By that kind of selective breeding, the present Khatkans are very dark indeed. They reverted to the primitive for survival. Then, about 200 years ago, long before the first survey scout discovered them, something happened. Either the parent race mutated, or, as sometimes occurs, a line of people with superior gifts emerged, not in a few isolated births, but with surprising regularity in 5 family clans. There was a short period of power struggle until they realized the foolishness of civil war and formed an oligarchy, heading a loose tribal organization. With the 5 families to push and lead, a new civilization developed, and when survey came to call, they were no longer savages. Combine bought the trade rights about 75 years ago. Then the company and the 5 families got together and marketed a luxury item to the galaxy. You know how every superjet bigshot on 25 planets wants to say he's hunted on Khatka. And if he can point out a Graz head on his wall or wear a tail bracelet, he's able to strut with the best. To holiday on Khatka is both fabulous and fashionable, and very, very profitable for the natives, and for Combine, who sells transportation to the travelers. "I hear they have poachers, too," Dane remarked. "Yes, that naturally follows. You know what a glam skin brings on the market. Wherever you have a rigidly controlled export, you're going to have poachers and smugglers. But the patrol doesn't go to Khatka. The natives handle their own criminals. Personally, I'd cheerfully take a 99-year sentence in the lunar mines in place of what the Khatkans dish out to a poacher they net." "So, that rumor has spread satisfactorily." Coffee slopped over the brim of Tao's mug, and Dane dropped the packet of steak concentrate he was about to feed into the cooker. Chief Ranger Asaki loomed in the doorway of the mess as suddenly as if he had been teleported to that point. The medic arose to his feet and smiled politely at the visitor. "Do I detect in that observation, sir, the suggestion that the tales I have heard were deliberately set to blast where they would do the most good as deterrents?" A fleeting grin broke the impassive somberness of the black face. "I was informed you are a man skilled in magic, medic. You certainly display the traditional sorcerer's quickness of wit. But this rumor is also truth." The quirk of good humor had gone again, and there was an edge in the Chief Ranger's voice which cut. Poachers on Khatka would welcome the patrol in place of the attention they now receive. He came into the mess cabin, Jellicoe behind him, and Dane pulled down 2 of the snap seats. He was holding a mug under the spout of the coffee dispenser as the captain made introductions. "Thorson, our acting cargo master." "Thorson?" the Khatkan acknowledged with a grave nod of his head, and then glanced down to the floor with a look of surprise. Weaving a pattern about his legs, purring loudly, Sinbad was offering an unusually fervent welcome of his own. The ranger went down on one knee, his hand out for Sinbad's inquiring sniff. Then the cat butted that dark palm, batted at it playfully with claw-sheathed paw. "A Terran cat. It is of the lion family?" "Far removed," Jellicoe supplied. "You'd have to add a lot of bulk to Sinbad to promote him to the lion class." "We have only the old tales." Asaki sounded almost wistful as the cat jumped to his knee and clawed for a hold on his chest belts. "But I do not believe that lions were ever so friendly toward my ancestors." Dane would have removed the cat, but the Khatkan arose with Sinbad, still purring loudly, resting in the crook of his arm. The ranger was smiling with a gentleness which changed the whole arrogant cast of his countenance. "Do not bring this one to Khatka with you, Captain, or you will never take him away again. Those who dwell in the inner courts would not let him vanish from their sight." "Ah, so this pleases you, small lion." He rubbed Sinbad gently under the throat, and the cat stretched his neck, his yellow eyes half closed in bliss. "Thorson," the captain turned to Dane, "that arrival report on my desk was the final one from Combine?" "Yes, sir. There's no hope of the rover setting down here before that date." Asaki sat down, still holding the cat. "So you see, Captain, Fortune has arranged it all. You have 2 tens of days. 4 days to go in my cruiser, 4 days for your return here, and the rest to explore the preserve. We could not ask for better luck, for I do not know when our paths may cross again. In the normal course of events, I will not have another mission to Zeko for a year, perhaps longer. Also—" He hesitated and then spoke to Tao. "Medic, Captain Jellicoe has informed me that you have made a study of magic on many worlds." "That is so, sir." "Do you then believe that it is real force, or that it is only a superstition for child people who set up demons to howl petitions to when some darkness falls upon them. Some of the magic I have seen is trickery, some of it founded upon an inner knowledge of men and their ways, which a shrewd witch-doctor can use to his advantage. There always remains— Tao put down his mug. There always remains a small residue of happenings and results for which we have not yet found any logical explanations. And I believe, Asaki interrupted, it is also true that a race can be conditioned from birth to be sensitive to forms of magic, so that men of that blood are particularly susceptible. That was more of a statement than a question, but Tao answered it. That is very true. A Lemurian, for example, can be sung to death. I've witnessed such a case. But upon a Terran or another off-world man, the same suggestion would have no effect. Those who settled Khatka brought such magic with them. The Chief Ranger's fingers still moved about Sinbad's jaw and throat soothingly, but his tone was chill, the coldest thing in the cramped space of the mess cabin. Yes, a highly developed form of it, Tao agreed. More highly developed, perhaps, than even you can believe, medic. That came in a hiss of cold rage. I think that its present manifestation, death by a beast that is not a beast, could be worth your detailed study. Why? Tao came bluntly to the point. Because it is a killing magic, and it is being carefully used to rid my world of key men we need badly. If there is a weak point in this cloudy attack shaping against us, we must learn it, and soon. It was Jellicoe who added the rest. We are invited to visit Khatka and survey a new hunting range as Chief Ranger Asaki's personal term guests. Dane drew a deep breath of wonder. Guest rights on Khatka were jealously guarded. They were too valuable to their owners to waste. Whole families lived on the income from the yearly rental of even half a one. But the Rangers, by right of office, had several which they could grant to visiting scientists or men from other worlds holding positions similar to their own. To have such an opportunity offered to an ordinary trader was almost incredible. His wonder was matched by Tao's, and must have been plain to read, for the Chief Ranger smiled. For a long time, Captain Jellicoe and I have exchanged biological data on alien life forms. His skill in photographing such, his knowledge as an xenobiologist, are widely recognized. And so I have permission for him to visit the new Zaboru Preserve, not yet officially opened. And you, Medic Tao, your help, or at least your diagnosis, we need in another direction. So, one expert comes openly, another not so openly. Though, Medic, your task is approved by my superiors. And, he glanced at Dane, perhaps to muddle the trail for the suspicious, shall we not ask this young man also? Dane's eyes went to the captain. Jellicoe was always fair, and his crew would have snapped into action on his word alone, even if they were fronting a rain of Thorkian death darts, and that order was to advance. But, on the other hand, Dane would never have asked a favor, and the best he hoped for was to be able to perform his duties without unfavorable comment upon their commission. He had no reason to believe Jellicoe was willing to agree to this. You have 2 weeks planet-side leave coming, Thorson. If you want to spend it on Khatka— Jellicoe actually grinned then. I take it you do. When do we up ship, sir? You said that you must wait for the return of your other crew members. Shall we say mid-afternoon tomorrow? The Chief Ranger stood up and put Sinbad down, though the cat protested with several sharp meows. Small Lion, the tall Khatkan spoke to the cat as to an equal. This is your jungle, and mine lies elsewhere. But should you ever grow tired of traveling the stars, there is always a home for you in my courts. When the Chief Ranger went out the door, Sinbad did not try to follow, but he uttered one mournful little cry of protest and loss. "So, he wants a troubleshooter, does he?" Tao asked. "All right, I'll try to hunt out his goblins for him. It'll be worth that to visit Khatka." Dane, remembering the hot glare of the Zeko spaceport, the sea one could not swim in, contrasted that with the trides he had seen of the green hunter's paradise on the next planet of the system. "Yes, sir," he echoed, and made a haphazard choice for the cooker. "Don't be too light-hearted," Tao warned. "I'll say that any stew which was too hot for that ranger to handle might give us burned fingers, and quick. When we land on Khatka, walk softly and look over your shoulder, and be prepared for the worst." End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. Lightning played along the black ridges above them, and below was a sheer drop to a river which was only a silver thread. Under their boots, man-made and yet dominating the wildness of jungle and mountain, was a platform of rock slabs, fused to support a palace of towering yellow-white walls and curved cups of domes. A palace which was also half fortress, half frontier post. Dane set his hands on the parapet of the river drop, blinked as a lightning bolt crackled in a sky-splitting glare of violet fire. This was about as far from the steaming islands of Zeko as a man could imagine. "The demon Graz prepare for battle." Asaki nodded toward the distant crackling. Captain Jellicoe laughed. "Supposed to be whetting their tusks, eh? I wouldn't care to meet a Graz that could produce such a display by mere tusk-whetting." "No, but think of the reward for the tracker who discovers where such go to die. To find the graveyard of the Graz herds would make any man wealthy beyond dreams." "How much truth is there in that legend?" Tao asked. The Chief Ranger shrugged. "Who can say? This much is true. I have served my life in the forest since I could walk. I have listened to the talk of trackers, hunters, rangers in my father's courtyards and field camps since I could understand their words. Yet never has any man reported the finding of a body of a Graz that died a natural death. The scavengers might well account for the bulk of flesh, but the tusks and the bones should be visible for years. And this, too, I have seen with my own eyes. A Graz, close to death, supported by two of its kind and being urged along to the big swamps. Perhaps it is only that the suffering animal longs for water at its end, or perhaps in the heart of that morass there does lie the Graz graveyard. But no man has found a naturally dead Graz, nor has any returned from exploring the big swamps. Lightning on peaks which were like polished jet-bare rock above, the lush overgrowth of jungle below. And between, this fortress held by men who dared both the heights and the depths. The wildly burgeoning life of Khatka had surrounded the off-worlders since they had come here. There was something untamable about Khatka. The lush planet lured and yet repelled at the same time. "Zaboru far from here?" The Chief Ranger pointed north in answer to the captain's question. "About 100 leagues. It is the first new preserve we have prepared in 10 years, and it is our desire to make it the best for Tri-D hunters. That is why we are now operating taming teams." "Taming teams?" Dane had to ask. The Chief Ranger was ready enough to discuss his project. "Zaboru is a no-kill preserve. The animals, they come to learn that after a while. But we cannot wait several years until they do. So we make them gifts." He laughed, evidently recalling some incident. "Sometimes, perhaps, we are too eager. Most of our visitors who wish to make Tri-Ds want to picture big game. Graz, amplet, rock apes, lions." "Lions?" echoed Dane. "Not Terran lions, no. But my people, when they landed on Khatka, found a few animals that reminded them of those they had always known, so they gave those the same names. A Khatkan lion is furred. It is a hunter and a great fighter, but it is not the cat of Terra. However, it is in great demand as a 3D actor, so we summon it out of lurking by providing free meals. One shoots a poli, a water rat, or a land deer, and drags the carcass behind a low-flying flitter. The lion springs upon the moving meat, which it can also scent, and the rope is cut, leaving a free dinner. The lions are not stupid. In a very short time they connect the sound of a flitter cutting the air with food. So they come to the banquet, and those on the flitter can take their 3D shots at ease. Only there must also be care taken in such training. One forest guard on the Komog preserve became too enterprising. He dragged his kill at first. Then, to see if he could get the lions to forget man's presence entirely, he hung the training carcasses on the flitter, encouraging them to jump for their food. For the guard that was safe enough, but it worked too well. A month or so later, a hunter was escorting a client through Komog, and they swung low to get a good picture of a water rat emerging from the river. Suddenly there was a snarl behind them, and they found themselves sharing the flitter with a lioness, annoyed at finding no meat waiting on board. Luckily they both wore staff belts, but they had to land the flitter and leave until the lioness wandered off, and she seriously damaged the machine in her irritation. So now our guards play no more fancy tricks while on taming runs. No, he corrected himself. The day after tomorrow, I will be able to show you how the process works. And tomorrow? Inquired the captain. Tomorrow my men make hunting magic. Asaki's voice was expressionless. Your chief witch doctor being? Questioned Tao. Lumbrilo. The chief ranger did not appear disposed to add to that, but Tao pursued the subject. His office is hereditary? Yes. Does that make any difference? For the first time there was a current of repressed eagerness in the other's tone. Perhaps a vast amount of difference, Tao replied. A hereditary office may carry with it two forms of conditioning, one to influence its holder, one to affect the public at large. Your Lumbrilo may have come to believe deeply in his own powers. He would be a very remarkable man if he did not. It is almost certain that your people unquestionably accept him as a worker of wonders. They do so accept. Once more Asaki's voice was drained of life. And Lumbrilo does not accept something you believe necessary? Again the truth, medic. Lumbrilo does not accept his proper place in the scheme of things. He is a member of one of your 5 families? No. His clan is small, always set apart. From the beginning here, those who spoke for gods and demons did not also order men. Separation of church and state, commented Tao thoughtfully. Yet in our Terran past there have been times when church and state were one. Does Lumbrilo desire that? Asaki raised his eyes to the mountain peaks, to the northward where lay his beloved work. I do not know what Lumbrilo wants, save that it makes mischief, or worse. This I tell you. Hunting magic is part of our lives, and it has at its core some of the most unexplainable happenings which you have acknowledged do exist. I have used powers I can neither explain nor understand as part of my work. In the jungle, and on the grasslands, an off-worlder must guard his life with a staff belt if he goes unarmed. But I, any of my men, can walk unharmed if we obey the rules of our magic. Only Lumbrilo does other things which his forefathers did not. And he boasts that he can do more. So he has a growing following of those who believe, and those who fear. You want me to face him? The chief ranger's big hands closed upon the rim of the parapet, as if they could exert enough pressure to crumble the hard stone. I want you to see whether there is trickery in this. Trickery I can fight. For that there are weapons. But if Lumbrilo truly controls forces for which there is no name, then perhaps we must patch up an uneasy peace, or go down in defeat. And, off-worlder, I come from a line of warriors. We do not drink defeat easily." "That I also believe," Tao returned quietly. "Be sure, sir, if there is trickery in this man's magic and I can detect it, the secret shall be yours." "Let us hope that so it shall be." Subconsciously, Dane had always associated the practice of magic with darkness and the night. But the next morning the sun was high and hot when he made one of the party coming down to a second and larger walled terrace, where the hunters, trackers, guards, and other followers of the chief ranger were assembled in irregular rows. There was a low sound which was more a throb in the clear air about them, getting into a man's blood and pumping in rhythm there. Dane tracked the sound to its source. 4 large drums standing waist-high before the men who tapped them delicately with the tips of all 10 fingers. The necklaces of claws and teeth about those dusky throats, the kilts of fringed hide, the crossed belts of brilliantly spotted or striped fur, were in contrast to the very efficient and modern sidearms each man wore, to the rest of the equipment sheathed and strapped at their belts. There was a carved stool for the chief ranger, another for Captain Jellicoe. Dane and Tao settled themselves on the less comfortable seats of the terrace steps. Those tapping fingers increased their rate of beat, and the notes of the drums rose from the low murmur of hived bees to the mutter of mountain thunder still half a range away. A bird called from those inner courts of the palace from which the women never ventured. Da, 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 da. Voices took up the thud-thud of the drums. The heads of the squatty men moved in a slow swing from side to side. Tao's hand closed about Dane's wrist, and the younger man looked around, startled, to see that the medic's eyes were alight, that he was watching the assembly with the alertness of Sinbad approaching prey. "Calculate the stowage space in number 1 hold." That amazing order, delivered in a whisper, shocked Dane into obeying it. Number 1 hold. There were 3 divisions now, and the stowage was... He became aware that for a small space of time he had escaped the net being woven by the beat of the drum, the drone of voices, the nodding of heads. He moistened his lips. So that was how it worked. He had heard Tao speak often enough about self-hypnotism under such conditions, but this was the first time the meaning of it had been clear. 2 men were shuffling out of nowhere, wearing nothing on their dark bodies but calf-length kilts of tails, black tails with fluffy white tips, which swayed uniformly in time to their pacing feet. Their heads and shoulders were masked by beautifully cured and semi-mounted animal heads, displaying half-open jaws with double pairs of curved fangs. The black and white striped fur, the sharply pointed ears, were neither canine nor feline, but a weird combination of the two. Dane gabbled 2 trading formulas under his breath, and tried to think of the relation of cementine rock coinage to galactic credits. Only this time his defenses did not work. From between the 2 shuffling dancers padded something on 4 feet. The canine-feline creature was more than just a head. It was a loose-limbed, graceful body fully 8 feet in length, and the red eyes and the prick-eared head were those of a confident killer. It walked without restraint, lazily, with arrogance, its white-tufted tail swinging. And when it reached the midpoint of the terrace, it flung up its head as if to challenge. But words issued from between those curved fangs. Words which Dane might not understand, but which undoubtedly held meaning for the men nodding in time to the hypnotic cadence of that da, da, da. "Beautiful." Tao spoke in honest admiration, his own eyes almost as feral as those of the talking beast as he leaned forward, his fists on his knees. Now the animal was dancing also, its paws following the pace set by the masked attendants. It must be a man in an animal skin. But Dane could hardly believe that. The illusion was too perfect. His own hands went to the knife-sheath at his belt. Out of deference to local custom, they had left their stun rods in the palace, but a belt-knife was an accepted article of apparel. Dane slid the blade out surreptitiously, setting its point against the palm of his hand and jabbing painfully. This was another of Tao's answers for breaking a spell. But the white and black creature continued to dance. There was no blurring of its body lines into those of a human being. It sang on in a high-pitched voice, and Dane noted that those of the audience nearest the stools where Asaki and the captain were seated now watched the chief ranger and the space officer. He felt Tao tense beside him. Trouble coming. The warning from Tao was the merest thread of sound. Dane forced himself to look away from the swaying cat-dog, to watch instead the singers who were now furtively eyeing their lord and his guest. The Terran knew that there were feudal bonds between the ranger and his men. But suppose this was a showdown between Lumbrilo and Asaki. Whose side would these men take? He watched Captain Jellicoe's hand slide across his knee, his fingers drop in touching distance of knife hilt. And the hand of the chief ranger, hanging lax at his side, suddenly balled into a fist. So! Tao expelled the word as a hiss. He moved with sure-footed speed. Now he passed between the stools to confront the dancing cat-dog. Yet he did not look at that weird creature and its attendants. Instead, his arms were flung high as if to ward off, or perhaps welcome, something on the mountain-side as he shouted, "Hodi! Eldama! Hodi!" As one, those on the terrace turned, looked up toward the slope. Dane was on his feet, holding his knife as he might a sword. Though of what use its puny length would be against that huge bulk moving in slow majesty toward them, he did not try to think. Grey-dark trunk curled upward between great ivory tusks. Ears went wide as ponderous feet crunched volcanic soil. Tao moved forward, his hand still upraised, clearly in greeting. That trunk touched skyward as if in salute to the man who could be crushed under one foot. "Hodi! Eldama!" For the second time Tao hailed the monster elephant, and the trunk raised in silent greeting from one lord of an earth to another he recognized as an equal. Perhaps it had been 1,000 years since man and elephant had stood so, and then there had been only war and death between them. Now there was peace, and a current of power flowing from one to the other. Dane sensed this, saw the men on the terrace likewise drawing back from the unseen tie between the medic and the bull he had so clearly summoned. Then Tao's upheld hands came together in a sharp clap, and the men held their breath in wonder. Where the great bull had stood there was nothing, except rocks in the sun. As Tao swung around to face the cat-dog, that creature had no substance either. For he fronted no animal but a man, a small, lean man whose lips wrinkled back from his teeth in a snarl. His attendant priest fell back, leaving the spaceman and the witch-doctor alone. "Lumbrilo's magic is great," Tao said evenly. "I hail Lumbrilo of Khatka." His hand made the open palm salute of peace. The snarl faded as the man brought his face under control. He stood naked, but he was clothed in inherent dignity. And there was power with that dignity, power and a pride before which even the more physically impressive chief ranger might have to give place. "You have magic also, Outlander," he replied. "Where walks this long-toothed shadow of yours now?" "Where once the men of Khatka walked, Lumbrilo. For it was men of your blood who long, long past hunted this shadow of mine and made its body their prey." "So that it now might have a blood debt to settle with us, Outlander?" "That you set, not I, man of power. You have shown us one beast, I have shown another. Who can say which of them is stronger when it issues forth from the shadows?" Lombrilo pattered forward, his bare feet making little sound on the stones of the terrace. Now he was only an arm's length away from the medic. "You have challenged me, off-world man." Was that a question or a statement? Dane wondered. "Why should I challenge you, Lombrilo? To each race its own magic. I come not to offer battle." His eyes held steady with the Khatkans. "You have challenged me." Lombrilo turned away and then looked back over his shoulder. "The strength you depend upon may become a broken staff, off-worlder. Remember my words in the time when shadows become substance, and substance the thinnest of shadows." End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. "You are truly a man of power." Tao shook his head in answer to that outburst from Asaki. "Not so, sir. Your Lombrilo is a man of power. I drew upon his power, and you saw the results. Deny it not. What we saw never walked this world." Tao slung the strap of a trail bag over his shoulder. "Sir, once men of your blood, men who bred your race, hunted the elephant. They took his tusks for their treasure, feasted upon his flesh, yes, and died beneath the trampling of his feet when they were unlucky or unwary. So there is that within you which can even now be awakened to remember El Dama in his might when he was king of the herd, and need fear nothing save the spears and cunning of small weak men. Lombrilo had already awakened your minds to see what he willed you to see." "How does he do this?" asked the other simply. "Is it magic that we see not Lombrilo but a lion before us?" "He weaves his spell with the drums, with the chant, by the suggestion his mind imposes upon yours, and having woven his spell, he cannot limit it to just the picture he suggests, if ancient racial memories raise another. I merely use the tools of Lombrilo to show you yet another picture your people once knew well." "And in so doing made an enemy." Asaki stood before a rack of very modern weapons. Now he made his selection, a silver tube with a stock curved to fit a man's shoulder. "Lombrilo will not forget." Tao laughed shortly. "No, but then I have merely done as you wished, have I not, sir? I have focused on myself the enmity of a dangerous man, and now you hope I shall be forced, in self-defense, to remove him from your path." The Khatkan turned slowly, resting the weapon across his forearm. "I do not deny that, spaceman." "Then matters are indeed serious." "They are so serious," Asaki interrupted, speaking not only to Tao, but to the other off-worlders as well, "that what happens now may mean the end of the Khatka that I know. Lombrilo is the most dangerous game I have faced in a lifetime as a hunter. He goes, or we draw his fangs, or else all that I am, all I have labored here to build, will be swept away. To preserve this, I will use any weapon." "And I am now your weapon, which you hope will be as successful as that needler you are carrying." Tao laughed again, without much humor. "Let us hope I shall prove as effective." Jellicoe moved out of the shadows. It was just after dawn, and the grayness of the vanishing night still held in the corners of the armory. Deliberately, he took his own stand before the arms racks and chose a short-barreled blaster. Only when its butt was cupped in his hand did he glance at his host. "We came guesting, Asaki. We have eaten salt and bread under this roof. On my body and my blood it is," returned the Khatkan grimly. "I shall go down to the blackness of Sabra before you do, if the flames of death are against us." From his belt he flipped loose his knife and offered the hilt to Jellicoe. "My body for a wall between you and the dark, Captain. But also understand this. To me, what I do now is greater than the life of any one man. Lumbrilo and the evil behind him must be rooted out. There was no trickery in my invitation." They stood eye to eye, equal in height, in authority of person, and that indefinable something which made them both masters in their own different worlds. Then Jellicoe's hand went out. His fingertip flicked the hilt of the bared blade. "There was no trickery," he conceded. "I knew that your need was great when you came to the Queen." Since both the captain and Tau appeared to accept the situation, Dane, not quite understanding it all, was prepared to follow their lead. And for the moment they had nothing more in plan than to visit the Zaboru Preserve. They went by flitter, Asaki, one of his hunter pilots, and the three from the Queen, lifting over the rim of mountains behind the fortress palace, and speeding north with the rising sun a flaming ball to the east. Below, the country was stark, rocks and peaks, deep purple shadows marking the veins of crevices. But that was swiftly behind, and they were over a sea of greens, many shades of green, with yellow, blue, even red cutting into the general verdant carpet of treetops. Another chain of heights, and then open land, swales of tall grass, already burnt yellow by the steady sun. There was a river here, a crazy, twisted stream, coiling nearly back upon itself at times. Once more broken land so ravished by prehistoric volcanic action that it was a grotesque nightmare of erosion-whittled outcrops and mesas. Asaki pointed to the east. There was a dark patch widening out into a vast wedge. "The swamp of Migra. It has not yet been explored." "You could air map it," Tau began. The chief ranger was frowning. 4 flitters have been lost trying that. Com reports fail when they cross that last mountain ridge eastward. There is some sort of interference, which we do not yet understand. Migra is a place of death. Later we may be able to travel along its fringe, and then you shall see. Now—" He spoke to the pilot in his own tongue, and the flitter pointed up-nose at an angle as they climbed over the highest peak they had yet seen in this mountainous land, to reach at last a country of open grass dotted with small forest stands. Jellicoe nodded approvingly. "Zaboru?" "Zaboru," Asaki assented. "We shall go up to the northern end of the preserve. I wish to show you the roosts of the fastals. This is their nesting season, and the sight is one you will long remember. But we shall take an eastern course. I have 2 ranger stations to check on the way." It was after they left the second station that the flitter swung farther out eastward, again climbing over the chain of heights, to sight one of the newly discovered wonders the staff at the last station had reported, a crater lake. And the flitter skimmed down across the water, which was a rich emerald in hue, filling the crater from one rock wall to the other, with no beach at the foot of those precipitant cliffs. As the machine arose to clear the far wall, Dane tensed. One of his duties aboard the Queen was flitter pilot for planet-wise trips, and ever since they had taken off that morning he had unconsciously flown with the Khatkan pilot, anticipating each change or adjustment of the controls. Now he felt that sluggish response to the other's lift signal, and instinctively his own hand went out to adjust a power feed lever. They made the rise, were well above the danger of the cliff wall. But the machine was not responding properly. Dane did not need to watch the pilot's swiftly moving hands to guess that they were in trouble, and his slight concern deepened into something else as the flitter began to drop nose again. In front of him, Captain Jellicoe shifted uneasily, and Dane knew that he, too, was alerted. Now the pilot had plunged the power adjuster to the head against the control board. But the nose of the flitter acted as if it were overweighted or magnetically attracted by the rocks below. The best efforts of the man flying it could not keep it level. They were being drawn earthward, and all the pilot could do only delayed the inevitable crack-up. The Khatkan was turning the machine north to avoid what lay below, for here a long arm of the Migra swamp clasped about the foot of the mountain. The Chief Ranger spoke into the mic of the comm unit while the pilot continued to fight against the pull which was bringing them down. Now the small machine was below the level of the volcanic peak which cradled the lake, and the mountain lay between them and the preserve. Asaki gave a muffled exclamation, slapped the comm box, spoke more sharply into the mic. It was apparent he was not getting the results he wanted. Then, with a quick glance about, he snapped an order. "Strap in." His Terran companions had already buckled the wide webbing belts intended to save them from crash shock. Dane saw the pilot push the button to release fin cushions. In spite of his pounding heart, a small fraction of his brain recognized the other's skill, as the Khatkan took a course to bring them down on a relatively level patch of sand and gravel. Dane raised his head from the shelter of his folded arms. The Chief Ranger was busy with the pilot, who lay limply against the controls. Captain Jellicoe and Tau were already pulling at the buckles of their protective crash belts. But one look at the front of the flitter told Dane that it would not take to the air again without extensive repairs. Its nose was bent up and back, obscuring the forward view completely. However, the pilot had made a miraculously safe landing, considering the terrain. 10 minutes later, the pilot restored to consciousness and the gash in his head bandaged, they held a council of war. The comm was off too. I did not have a chance to report before the crash. Asaki put the situation straightly. And our exploring parties have not yet mapped this side of the range. It has a bad reputation because of the swamp. Jellicoe measured the heights now to their west with resigned eyes. "Looks as if we climb." "Not here," the Chief Ranger corrected him. "There is no passing through the Crater Lake region on foot. We must travel south along the edge of the mountain area until we do find a scalable way into the preserve region." "You seem very certain we are not going to be rescued if we stay right here," Tau observed. "Why?" "Because I am inclined to believe that any flitter that tries to reach us may run into the same trouble. Also, they have no comfix on us. It will be at least a day or more before they will even begin to count us missing. And then they will have the whole northern portion of the preserve to comb. There are not enough men here. I can give you a multitude of reasons, medic." "One of which might be sabotage?" demanded Jellicoe. Asaki shrugged. "Perhaps. I am not loved in some quarters. But there may also be something fatal to flitters here as there is over Migra. We thought the Crater Lake district safely beyond the swamp influence, but it may not be so." "But you took the chance of traveling over it," Dane thought, though he did not comment aloud. Was this another of the Chief Ranger's attempts to involve them in some private trouble of his own? Though to deliberately smash up a flitter and set them all afoot in this wilderness was a pretty drastic move. Asaki had started to unload emergency supplies from the flitter. They each had a trail bag for a pack. But when the pilot staggered over to pull out a set of stass belts and Jellicoe began to uncoil them, the Chief Ranger shook his head. "With the feeder beam shut off by the mountains, I fear those will no longer work." Jellicoe tossed one on the crumpled nose of the flitter and punched its button with the tip of the needler barrel. Then he threw a rock at the dangling belt. The stone landed, taking the wide protective band with it to the ground. That force field, which should have warded off the missile, was not working. "Oh, fine." Tau opened his trail bag to pack concentrates. Then he smiled crookedly. "We aren't signed in for killing licenses, sir. Do you pay our fines if we are forced to shoot a hole through something that disputes the right-of-way?" To Dane's surprise, the Chief Ranger laughed. "You are off preserve now, Medic Tau. The rules do not cover wildland. but I would suggest we now hunt a cave before nightfall." "Lions?" asked Jellicoe. Dane, remembering the black-and-white beast Lombrilo had presented, did not enjoy that thought. They had— his gaze went from man to man, checking weapons— the needler Asaki carried, and another the pilot had slung by its carrying strap over his shoulder. Tao and the captain both were armed with blasters, and he had a fire ray and a force blade, both considered small arms, but deadly enough perhaps even to dampen a lion's enthusiasm for the chase. Lions, gras, rock apes. Asaki fastened the mouth of his trail bag. All are hunters or killers. The gras send out scouts, and they are big and formidable enough to have no enemies. Lions hunt with intelligence and skill. Rock apes are dangerous, but luckily they cannot keep silent when they scent their prey, and so give one warning. As they climbed upslope from the flitter, Dane, looking back, saw that perhaps Asaki was right in his belief that they had better try to help themselves rather than wait for rescue. Putting aside the excuse of fearing another crack-up, the wrecked flitter made no outstanding mark on the ground. The higher they climbed, the less it could be distinguished from the tumble of rocks about it. He had lagged a little behind, and when he hurried to catch up, found Jellicoe standing with his distance vision lenses to his eyes, directing them toward that shadow marking the swamp. As the younger spaceman reached him, the captain lowered the glasses and spoke. "Take your knife, Thorson, and hold it close to that rock, over there." He pointed to a rounded black knob protruding from the soil a little off their path. Dane obeyed, only to have the blade jerk in his hand, and when he loosened his hold in amazement, the steel slapped tight against the stone. "Magnetic." "Yes, which might explain our crash. Also this." Jellicoe held out a field compass to demonstrate that its needle had gone completely mad. "We can use the mountain range itself for a guide," Dane said with more confidence than he felt. "True enough, but we may have trouble when we head west again." Jellicoe let the lenses swing free on their cord about his neck. "If we were wrecked on purpose—" His mouth tightened, and the old blaster burn on his cheek stretched as did his jaw set. "Then someone is going to answer a lot of questions, and fast." "The Chief Ranger, sir?" "I don't know. I just don't know." The captain grunted as he adjusted his pack and started on. If fortune had failed them earlier, she smiled on them now. Asaki discovered a cave before sundown, located not too far from a mountain stream. The Ranger sniffed the air before that dark opening as the hunter pilot shed his equipment and crept forward on his hands and knees, his head up and his nostrils expanding as he too tested the scent from the cave mouth. Scent? It was closer to a stench, and one ripe enough to turn the stomach of an off-worlder. But the hunter glanced back over his shoulder and nodded reassuringly. "Lion, but old. Not here within 5 days, at least." "Well enough, and even old lion scent will keep away rock apes. We'll clean some, and then we can rest undisturbed," was his superior's comment. The cleaning was easy, for the brittle bedding of dried bracken and grass the beast had left burned quickly, cleansing with both fire and smoke. When they raked the ashes out with branches, Asaki and Naimani brought in handfuls of leaves, which they crumpled and threw on the floor, spreading an aromatic odor which banished most of the foulness. Dane, at the stream with the canteens to fill, chanced upon a small pool, where there was a spread of smooth yellow sand. Knowing well the many weird booby traps one might stumble into on a strange world, the Terran prospected carefully, stirring up the sand with a stick. Sighting not so much as a water insect or a curious fish, he pulled off his boots, rolled up his breeches, and waded in. The water was cool and refreshing, though he dared not drink it until the purifier was added. Then, with the filled canteens knotted together by their straps, he put on his boots and climbed to the cave, where Tao waited with water tablets. Half an hour later, Dane sat cross-legged by the fire, turning a spit strung with 3 small birds Asaki had brought in. 1 foot closer to the heat began to tingle, and he eased off his boot, his cramped toes suddenly seeming to have doubled in size. He was staring wide-eyed at these same toes, puffed, red, and increasingly painful to the touch, when Naimani squatted beside him, inspected his foot closely, and ordered him to take off his other boot. "What is it?" Dane found that shedding the other boot was a minor torture in itself. Naimani was cutting tiny splinters, hardly thicker than a needle, from a stick. "Sandworm lays eggs in flesh. We burn them out or you have bad foot." "Burn them out?" Dane echoed, and then swallowed as he watched Naimani advance a splinter to the fire. "Burn them," the Khatkan repeated firmly. "Burn tonight, hurt some tomorrow. All well soon. No burn, very bad." Dane ruefully prepared to pay the consequences of his first brush with the unpleasant surprises Khatka had to offer. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Dane regarded his throbbing feet morosely. Naimani's operations with burning splinters had been hard to take, but he had endured them without disgracing himself before the Khatkans, who appeared to regard such a mishap as just another travel incident. Now, with Tao's salve soothing the worst of the after-effects, the Terran was given time to reflect upon his own stupidity and the fact that he might now prove a drag on the whole party the next morning. "That's queer." Dane was startled out of the contemplation of his misery to see the medic on his knees before their rows of canteens, the vial of water purifier held to the firelight for a closer inspection. "What's the matter?" "We must have hit with a pretty hard thump back there. Some of these pills are powder. Have to guess about the portion to add." With the tip of his knife blade, Tao scraped a tiny amount of pill fragments into each waiting canteen. "That should do it. But if the water tastes a little bitter, don't let it bother you." Bitter water, Dane thought, trying to flex his still swollen toes, was going to be the least of his worries in the morning. But he determined that his boots should go on at daybreak, and he would keep on his feet as long as the others did, no matter how much it cost him. And when they set out shortly after daybreak, wanting to move as far as they could before the heat hours when they must rest, the going was not too bad. Dane's feet were tender to the touch, but he could shuffle along at the tail of the procession with only Naimani playing rearguard behind him. Jungle lay before them, and bush knives began to swing, clearing their path. Dane took his turn with the rest at that chore, thankful that the business of cutting their way through that massive greenery slowed them to a pace he could match, if not in comfort, then by willpower. But the sandworms were not the only troubles one could encounter on Khatka. Within an hour, Captain Jellicoe stood sweating and speaking his mind freely in the native tongues of 5 different planets, while Tao and Naimani worked as a team with skinning knives. They were not flaying the spaceman, but they came near to that in places as they worried a choice selection of tree thorns out of his arm and shoulder. The captain had been unfortunate enough to trip and fall into the embrace of a very unfriendly bush. Dane inspected a fallen tree for evidence of inimical wildlife, and then rested his blanket between him and it as a protecting cushion before he sat down. These trees were not the towering giants of the true forests, but rather oversized bushes, which had been made into walls by twined vines. Brilliant bursts of flowers were splotches of vivid color, and the attendant insect life was altogether too abundant. Dane tried to tally his immunity shots and hoped for the best. At the moment, he wondered why anyone would want to visit Khatka, let alone pay some astronomical sum for the privilege, though he could also guess that the plush safari arranged for a paying client might be run on quite different lines from their own present trek. How could a tracker find his way through this, with the compasses playing crazy tricks into the bargain? Jellicoe knew that the compasses were off, yet the captain had followed Asaki's lead without question, so he must trust the ranger's forest craft. But Dane wished they were clear on the mountainside again. Time had little meaning in that green gloom, but when they worked through to meet rock walls again, the sun said it was well into the after part of the day. They sheltered for a breather under the drooping limbs of one of the last trees. Amazing! Jellicoe, his torn arm in a sling across his chest, came downslope from the higher point where he had been using the distance lenses. We struck straight across and cut off about 10 miles by that jungle jog. Now I believe all that I've heard of your people's ability to cross wilderness and not lose their built-in riding beam, sir. With the compasses out, I'll admit I've been nourishing a healthy set of doubts." Asaki laughed. "Captain, I do not question your ability to flit from world to world, or how you have learned to set up trade with strange humans and non-humans alike. To each his own mystery. On Khatka, every boy, before he becomes a man, must learn to navigate the jungle, and with no instruments to help him, only what lies in here." He touched his thumb to his forehead. "So through generations we have developed our homing instincts. Those who did not also did not live to father others who might have had the same lack. We are hounds who can run on a scent, and we are migrators who have better than a compass within our own bodies." "Now we take to climbing again?" Tao surveyed the way before them critically. "Not at this hour. The sun on the upward slopes can cook a man's skin were he to touch any rock. We wait." Waiting for the Khatkans was a chance to sleep. They curled up on their light blankets. But the 3 spacemen were restless. Dane would have liked to have taken off his boots, but he feared he could not replace them. And he could tell from the way the captain shifted his position that Jellicoe was in pain too. Tao sat quietly, staring at nothing Dane could see, unless it was a tall rock thrust out of the slope like a finger pointing skyward. "What color is that rock?" Surprised, Dane gave the stony finger closer attention. To him it was the same color as most of the other rocks, a weathered black which in certain lights appeared to carry a brownish film. "Black, or maybe dark brown?" Tao looked past him to Jellicoe. The captain nodded. "I'd agree with that." Tao cupped his hands over his eyes for a moment, and his lips moved as if he were counting. Then he took his hands away and stared upslope. Dane watched the medic's eyelids blink slowly. "Nothing but black or brown?" Tao pressed. "No." Jellicoe supported his injured arm upon his knees, leaning forward, as intent upon the designated rock as if he expected it to assume some far more startling appearance. "Queer," Tao said to himself, and then added briskly, "You're right, of course. The sun can play tricks with one's eyes." Dane continued to watch the finger rock. Maybe strong sunlight could play tricks, but he could see nothing odd about that rough lump. And since the captain asked no questions of Tao, he did not quite want to either. It was perhaps a half-hour later, and the medic and Jellicoe had both succumbed to the quiet, the heat, and their own fatigue, when Dane did sight a movement upslope. The throbbing in his feet was worse now that he had nothing to occupy his mind but his own troubles, and he was sitting facing the finger rock. Was that what Tao had seen earlier? That quick movement around the side of the rough pillar? But if so, why the question of color? There it was again. And now, centering all his attention on that one point, the Terran picked out the outline of a head. A head grotesque enough to be something conjured out of Lumbrillo's sorcerer's imagination. Had Dane not seen its like among the Tri-D prints in Captain Jellicoe's collection, he would have believed that his eyes were playing tricks. It was a bullet-shaped head, embellished by two outsized prick ears, the hair-tufted pointed tips of which projected well above the top of the skull. Round eyes were set deeply in sunken pits. The mouth was a swinish snout, from which lolled a purple tongue, though the rest of that gargoyle head was very close in color to the rock against which it half rested. Dane had no doubts that the rock-ape was spying upon the small camp. Having heard tales of those semi-intelligent animals, the most intelligent native creatures of Khatka, most of which were concerned with their more malignant characteristics, Dane was alarmed. That lurker could be an advance scout of some pack, and a pack of rock-apes, if able to surprise their prey, were formidable opponents. Asaki stirred, sat up, and that round head above turned to follow the Chief Ranger's every move. Above, by the finger rock, to the right. Dane kept his voice close to a whisper. When he saw the sudden constriction of muscle across the Khatkan's bare shoulders, he knew that the other had heard and understood. Only, if Asaki had spotted the rock-ape, he did not betray his knowledge. The Khatkan got lithely to his feet. Then one of those feet stirred Naimani into the instant wakefulness of the wilderness-trained man. Dane slid his hand about the bole of the tree and touched Jellicoe, watched the captain's gray eyes open with a similar awareness. Asaki picked up his needler. Weapon in hand, he whirled and fired, almost in one connected movement. It was the fastest shot Dane had ever seen. The gargoyle head lifted away from the rock, and then turned to one side as its body, somehow vaguely obscene in its resemblance to the human form, fell away to sprawl limply downslope. Though the dead rock-ape had not had a chance to give tongue, there came a cry from above, a coughing, deep-throated hawking. Down the steep incline bumped a round white ball, bouncing past the tumbled carcass of the ape, sailing up into the air, to strike and burst open a few feet away. Back! With one arm Asaki sent Jellicoe, his nearest neighbor, tumbling back into the jungle. Then the Chief Ranger pumped a stream of needle rays into the remains of the ball. A shrill, sweet humming arose as red motes, vivid as molten copper in the sunlight, climbed on wings beating too fast to be seen. The debris of the nest smoked into nothing, but no needle ray could hope to stop all the poisonous army issuing forth from it, fighting mad to seek any warm-blooded creature within scenting distance. The men threw themselves into the brush, rolling in the thick mold of the vegetable decay on the ground, rubbing its moist plaster over their bodies in frantic haste. Red-hot fire, far worse than any of the splinter torment Dane had undergone the night before, pierced between his shoulders. He rolled on his back, shoving himself along, both to kill the fire-wasp and coat the sting with cooling mold. Cries of pain told him that he was not the only sufferer, as all dug hands into the slimy stuff under them and slapped it over their faces and heads. "Apes!" That half-shout got through to alert the men on the jungle floor. True to their nature, the rock-apes, now streaming downhill, were coughing their challenges, advertising their attack. And it was only that peculiarity of their species which saved their intended victims. The apes came forward, partially erect at a shambling run. The first two, bulls close to 6 feet, went down under fire from Asaki's needler. A third somehow escaped, swerving to the left, and came bounding at an angle toward Dane. The Terran jerked free his force blade as that swine's snout split wide to show greenish tusks, and the horrible stench of the creature's body made him gasp. A taloned paw clawed at him eagerly, slipped from his slime-covered body just as he brought the force blade up. Foul breath coughed in his face, and he stumbled back as the heavy body of the ape crashed against him, cut in half by the weapon. To Dane's sickened horror, the paws still clawed for him, the fangs still gnashed as he rolled free of the mangled body and somehow got to his feet. The roar of a blaster, of 2 blasters, drowned out the clamor of the apes as Dane drew his fire ray, set his shoulders against a tree bole, and prepared to fight it out. He fired, saw a smaller and more nimble enemy go down screeching. Then there were none left on their shaggy feet, though some on the ground dragged themselves forward, still striving to reach the men. Dane slapped a fire-wasp from his leg. He was glad of the support of the tree at his back as the smell of the ape's blood drenching him from chest level down and the mess on the ground made his stomach churn. When he could control his retching, he straightened. To his relief, he saw that all the others were on their feet, apparently unharmed. But Tau, catching sight of the younger spaceman, gasped and started for him. "Dane, what did they do?" His junior laughed a little hysterically. "Not mine." He swabbed with a handful of grass at his bloodied breeches and blundered on into the sunlight. Naimani found them a foam-flecked stream below a miniature falls where the swift current prevented the lurking of sandworms. They stripped eagerly, cleaning first themselves and then their fouled clothing, while Tau tended the wealth of fire-wasp stings. There was little he could do to relieve the swelling and pain until Asaki produced a reed-like plant which, chopped in sections, yielded a sticky purple liquid that dried on the skin as a tar gum, the native remedy. So, glued and plastered, they climbed away from the water and prepared to spend the night in a hollow between 2 leaning rocks, certainly not as snug as the cave, but a fortress of sorts. And credit-happy space hoppers pay a fortune for an outing like this, Tau commented bitterly, hunching well forward so that a certain stung portion of his anatomy would not come in contact with the rock beneath him. "Hardly for this," Jellicoe replied, and Dane saw Naimani grin one-sidedly, his other cheek puffed and painted sticky purple. "We do not always encounter apes and fire-wasps in the same day," supplied the Chief Ranger. "Also, guests at the preserves wear stas belts." Jellicoe snorted. "I don't think you get any repeats from your clients otherwise. What do we meet tomorrow? A herd of gras on stampede, or something even more subtle and deadly?" Naimani got up and walked a little way from their rock shelter. He turned down slope, and Dane saw his nostrils expand, as they had when he had investigated the cave. "Something is dead," he said slowly. "A very large something. Or else—" Isaki strode down to join his men. He gave a curt nod, and Naimani skidded on down the mountainside. "What is it?" Jellicoe asked. "It might be many things. There is one I hope it is not," was the Chief Ranger's somewhat evasive reply. "I will hunt a labla. There was fresh spoor at the stream." He set off along their back trail to return a half-hour later, the body of his kill slung across one shoulder. He was skinning it when Naimani trotted back. "Well?" "Death pit," supplied the hunter. "Poachers?" Jellicoe inquired. Naimani nodded. Asaki continued his task, but there was a glint in his dark eyes as he butchered with sure and expert strokes. Then he glanced at the shadow extending beyond the rocks. "I, too, would see," he told Naimani. Jellicoe arose, and Dane, interested, followed. Some 5 minutes later, none of them needed the native keenness of smell to detect the presence of some foulness ahead. The odor of corruption was almost tangible in the sultry air, and it grew worse until they stood on the edge of a pit. Dane retreated hurriedly. This was as bad as the battlefield of the rock apes. But the captain and the 2 Khatkans stood calmly assessing the slaughter left by the hide poachers. "Glam, Graz, Hudra," Jellicoe commented. "Tusks and hides, the full line of trade stuff." Asaki, his expression bleak, stepped back from the pit. "Day-old calves, old ones, females, all together. They kill wantonly and leave those they do not choose to pelt." "Trail," Naimani pointed eastward, "leads to Migra Swamp." "The swamps?" Asaki was shaken. "They must be mad." "Or know more about this country than your men do," Jellicoe corrected. "If poachers can enter Migra, then we can follow." "But not now," Dane protested silently. Certainly Asaki did not mean that they were to track outlaws into swamps the Khatkans had already labeled unexplored death traps. End of Chapter 4.